Welcome to the Ember Talking Tech and Talent podcast, where Australian business leaders and experts discuss the technology and talent challenges facing organizations today and the opportunities available to innovative businesses in the future. Let's get the conversation started.
Mark, welcome. Lovely to see you again.
You as well, Tim. Super excited to be here.
I find you in Detroit in the afternoon, I believe.
It is. It's finally getting cold here again because I think, based on where you're at and where I'm at, it's probably getting warmer for you. And now I'm putting on my coat here today. So never a fan of this time of year.
Now we've got, I think, a pretty interesting conversation ahead because you have not the unique title necessarily, but the wonderful title of a modern work designer and evangelist at Atlassian.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, did you even believe such a title existed at one point in your career?
So, you know what? Based on what I've seen on LinkedIn, you can make your title anything. So, but I will say that I did not believe that was that was in my future. If you asked me 3 years ago when I joined Atlassian, did I think that I would be a modern work evangelist? I probably wouldn't have put that in the cards, but I will say it is exactly where I wanted to be ultimately in my career someday. And that is getting out there, talking to people about how they work better, the practices behind innovation, how do we leverage tools to actually be more efficient and effective, those sorts of things. And that's where a lot of my job gets to play out. And I got a cool title to go with it, especially one that I love around the modern work piece, because what it really resonates to me with is this idea of today. Today is the modern day. We are dealing with problems today that 3 years ago we didn't expect to be dealing with. And instead of focusing on maybe 3 years in the future and saying, hey, what are those problems? We got plenty of things that we can focus on right now. What are the things that are holding our teams back? How do we help them? Those sorts of things. So that's where I like to spend my time.
Yeah, it's awesome. And there's so much of that to unpack. I think later on we're going to focus on some of these sort of distributed working piece that's become a reality for so many organizations. And as a nod to that, I normally sit in person in a studio in Sydney with my guests. So as a nod to that, you are my first, we are distributed, Mark.
Yes.
Phrase.
Exactly. I remember our first conversation. We're like, you know what, we're going to do this distributed. We're going to show them it's possible.
Which is a shame because I was hoping for a trip to Detroit, but there you go.
I know, right? I was banging for a trip to Sydney, but you know what? That wasn't in the cards.
Next time.
Exactly.
Now, before we do the work piece, I'm always interested in who the person is I'm talking to. Now, I'm going to ask this in a slightly different way today to start with, which is you're there in the man cave, okay? If you weren't in the man cave and for some bizarre reason I was in your house, in the man cave, a bit like that TV show where they go around a celebrity's house and they have to guess who it is, what would the man cave say to me? Who would I think inhabited it?
You know what? I think you go around here and you would go around and say, this person has incredibly too many kids' toys in his room. And I would say that person is right. I am a big fan of sci-fi. As you can tell from some of the things, I've got my lightsabers on the wall, my little R2-D2. You can look in the back and you can get everything from, what is it? The Megazord from Power Rangers to Ghostbusters down below. So, to me, I love the idea. You would find somebody in this case who is fascinated with like the fantasy world, what is possible, like those sorts of things, and is probably a little, has spent a very large chunk of change with Lego, out there. So they probably have a whole percentage point in GDP probably associated with me.
I love it. Right, so let's get under the skin of the world of work as a I've shortened it again on these notes to now a modern work evangelist. I've dropped the designer part. So let's call you a modern work designer and evangelist.
There you go. I like it.
Let's bring that role to life in sort of fairly simple terms for the listener and the viewer. But also perhaps, if I may, I'm sitting in Sydney, so Atlassian to Australia is it is the pioneer success story in global tech.
Yeah.
So in my humble opinion. So what does the fact that your role has evolved and exists at Atlassian also say about Atlassian?
So kind of to summarize a little bit like around my role. So as that modern work evangelist and designer, my role is to go out there and talk about, like, again, the practices that we at Atlassian follow to help kind of improve our own teamwork, but then also learn from other organizations too. So I love going out there and talking with customers, finding out what are the things you're trying, what are you experimenting with. And my goal is not necessarily to go out there and be like, hey, you want to use Confluence or Jira? No, it's to find out, hey, what are the practices that you're using to unleash your potential? Because I mean, that's what we're all about.
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
to me, I really love that Atlassian is invested in this area because, again, to your point, in Australia, Atlassian is a highly known brand. I would venture to say in the US, we're probably not as known as a brand. And because there's a lot of different voices out here in the US too that are trying to do the same thing. So for us as Atlassian, we want to kind of say, well, what makes us special? What makes us different? And honestly, it's our approach to work. It's our practices. And so we've said, you know what? We need to invest in that. We're holding all the good stuff in, right? We're not sharing it out. We got the playbook out there, but what are the other things? What are the stories we can tell? And so that's where I kind of look at Atlassian investing in this, as they say, let's go tell our stories. Let's go talk to people about the cool stuff that we're doing and the things that we see happening and that we're investing in around, like, things like modern work, like how we solve the problems today.
And I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
Yes.
So forgive me. That's just an excuse saying that, isn't it? For when you
there you go, exactly.
About to give my own opinion or be offensive slightly. So to me, the notion of being a modern work evangelist suggests a very, very free form blank sheet of paper. I can almost picture you lying in a sort of a ball pit like an ad agency exec, just thinking all day. Okay. Yeah, it's just it sounds phenomenal. Okay. But then, and this is where the cynical British part comes in. You then early on mentioned Jira and Confluence.
Yeah.
So is it a proxy for just selling product? Has that offended you enough early on or not?
Yeah, I know, right? How dare you, Tim? How dare you?
I forgot my British
well, one thing I'll say is I don't have a ball pit. I wish I did. That sounds amazing. I may invest in that.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing that I kind of find is, in the end, yes, our practices leverage our products. But the cool thing is we also share a lot of practices that use other products. I was at an event last week, and instead of using something like Confluence to talk about how we have more collaborative meetings, I actually use Miro out there because I was like, this is a better tool for it. And we at Atlassian recognize that's a really good tool for that. And so for me, I want to share with you how you do work better. And through that, there's going to be a couple different mechanisms you can do that. And maybe it's one of our products, maybe it's not one of our products. Cool if honestly, if I look at the bottom line, super cool if you see, oh man, Trello, I didn't realize I can use Trello like that, and I'm going to totally invest in that. That's great for me as an organization, as the Atlassian organization, but that's not my goal. That's not my charge to go out there and do. It's really to go out there and talk about the cool things that we're doing and share those practices.
And to give people a sense of that, I mean, there's a couple of things I wanted to look at. The nature of your role in simple terms covers, well, you bullet pointed some of this is from LinkedIn, but around effective teaming, creating flow across an organization, the distributed teamwork piece post-pandemic, all aimed essentially at quote getting shit done. Although you
amen to that.
But amen to that. So again, I see that as kind of potential for real free thinking. You, I think, have actually come up through essentially a tech background, haven't you? On the tools, agile guy and related areas.
So a lot of my background has kind of come up from how do we working with teams. Like I was a coach for a number of years. I worked with teams to help, teams and organizations. How do we go through things like digital transformations, agile transformations? And then even here at Atlassian, I spent my first few years actually working with a number of our big customers to figure out how do they think about connecting strategy to execution. How do they think about, the practices needed to say, we're going to go use a system of goal tracking called OKRs, objectives and key results. How do we do that?
And correct me if I'm wrong, I'm wondering if your world is almost at the intersection of the psychology of the human and technology. Is that taking it too far, or?
So the way I like to, and I even have talked to people about this, is my role, and even Atlassian in general, like you think about, our mission to unleash the potential of teams. Like I look at us as we are in the business of creating effective teams, of teamwork. And the cool thing is we just happen to build, we found that building technology products to help us do that, it's a great way to help accomplish that goal. That was the means to the end. And so I love that. And I think that's where, to your point, the intersection of technology and the human experience come in, because the saying I like to put out there is that if you have practices or process without tooling, you've got some great effectiveness. You're doing the right stuff, but you're probably not very efficient at it. You probably, I'm an age-old agilist, but honestly, having to put all my sticky notes on the wall, especially nowadays, you can't do that. Your team's not all there.
Well,
like
exactly,
that was always something where it's like, oh, it felt good, but am I very efficient here? Not really. Versus if I just had the tools, so I go in and I'm like, cool, I got Jira, it's going to make me agile. No, tooling without practice or process is efficiency without effectiveness. And I would honestly argue that efficiency is just getting you to the wrong place faster at that point. So you got to have both. You figure out how you marry those and feather them together to actually create the outcome that you're searching for.
When we were sort of workshopping titles, I think you came up with "The future is distributed, full stop." So
full stop.
It's a pretty definitive statement that suggests that that's what you're pinning your colors to. And you're talking about here in terms of, offices, practices, a focus on skills above and beyond just perhaps just a job title. So I'm really fascinated to understand, in a general sense, some of your learnings and observations around that. And then I think you've actually crystallized some of that into a report, The State of Teams, an Atlassian report with what we love, a bit of data driving the
Ooh, yeah, right, exactly.
Data. So freewheel around it, talk freely about it.
Yeah, so it's really cool. So a few years ago, back, I think it was actually 2020, we decided they were like, you know what, we're obsessed with this idea of teamwork. So let's actually go out there and study it. So we actually have a team of researchers that have spent time over the last couple of years going out there and better understanding how teams are working. And one of those areas that we focused on was this idea of distributed work. It's a trend out there. It's, is it myth or is it fact? What's the thing impacting how we work?
This was pre-pandemic, was it?
So we started actually the year of, I believe we started collecting data right after, as the pandemic was just started. And then we've run our second report last year. And then our third report actually just finished, and it's going to be released here a little bit later this year.
Yeah, right.
And so we've got 3 years of data now that we're starting to see. So at this point, it's no longer an instance. It's now actually a trend that we can start kind of pointing to and saying, hey, we've got patterns.
Yeah, good.
And one of the most interesting things that kind of came out of this is we were fascinated by this. Like, hey, we made that statement back in mid 2020 that says, hey, you know what, we're going to be a distributed first company. Call it Team Anywhere. It's this idea that we're going to be out there. How, yes, we're making that decision. We think it's the right thing, but is it the right thing? Does it impact how teams are effective out there? And so we ran this survey to actually find out, how are teams doing? And we called it the Team Health Index, which looked at everything from, things like the culture to the performance to the sustainability of a team. And we found that when you looked at maybe teams that are just in the office versus teams that are fully remote versus teams that are kind of in the middle, a little bit of mixed match, that hybrid area, that in the end, the office didn't actually make an impact in terms of making teams more or less effective. Teams generally stayed within the same range. I think it was roughly between 15 and 20%, about a 5% range of incredibly effective teams were versus, and actually we found that hybrid was actually higher. It was the 20%, but again, it's not that much different.
No. And by effective, are you focusing purely on productivity there at the expense of anything else at the moment? Are you just saying productivity wise?
So when we think about, and this is kind of playing into this idea of team health. So team health is going to be looking at a couple different factors, which includes things like, are we getting our work done? So our performance or our productivity, is the culture that we're working in, is it good? So yeah, I might get a lot of stuff done, but am I bulldozing to get it done? Like that would make me an ineffective team. And then other elements, like again, is it a quick-lived team? Is it a long-lived team? Those sorts of elements. And so that's kind of all played into what means this idea of a healthy team. And so what we found was that in general, again, we've got about 17% on average of teams are truly effective teams, which is a scary fact in just of itself, that, only 17% of teams out there are really, hitting it on all marks.
We get about 17%.
Yeah, 17. That means 83% of teams are not as effective as they could be, which is a little scary.
I mean, that's the danger of researching anything, doing any sort of report. You might not.
you might not like the results. Well, you know what? It's a target-rich opportunity. That's what it is, Tim. It's like, hey, there's a lot of places we can help.
What other clear differences were there? Material differences between fully remote, hybrid, and teams who were still in situ for whatever reason? Were there other obvious differences?
So we did find that, some of the big things that played out when you were a hybrid or remote area is that there were things like better perception of things like organizational culture, looking at things of giving you that freedom, that flexibility. So my team culture might be great, I might have great team health, but what's my perception of my overall organization? And if my organization is the one that says, no, thou shalt come back into the office, thou shalt be here, I may not look as kindly as someone like Atlassian says, you make the choice. We're distributed first. If you want to be in the office full time, awesome. That is your call. If you want to go work in Detroit, awesome. They got great Coney dogs there.
Yeah. Making me hungry.
I know, right? Me too.
Not exactly sure what a Coney dog is, but they sound awesome.
I know, right? You'll have to look it up afterwards. All your listeners eat delicious.
We'll put one on the screen. We'll put a Coney dog on the screen.
I like it.
So let's have a recap there. So you've got data now, trend of data 3 years. It's presumably, from what I'm making an assumption here, it's reinforcing your findings. You have a whole different finding where 17% of teams are, what was the phrase? I better be careful. Healthy. Okay. So target-rich environments in the 83%. But that bit doesn't relate to where they are necessarily. You're essentially saying that's a less important piece. But in terms of now, I'm not of the assumption that distributed working is a sort of a zero-sum game. I don't believe because you gain on one hand, you have to lose on another. You said it earlier. We're anchored, and many people are anchored to how we used to work. And there's a sense of breaking that shackle and going, right, this is how we now work. But how does that play into the cultural piece that you've touched on, and the understanding and feeling for the culture of your business? Does it matter?
Yeah.
Does it matter, or is that an illusion that it matters what the culture of our business is?
So I believe it. Yes, it does matter. And I mean, actually, Atlassian's a great example. So like when I started in 2019, so 3 years ago, I started November of that year. So, I mean, 4 months before, we all went home for a few years,
You can't blame yourself, Mark.
I know, right? Exactly.
Cause and effect.
I try not to. But it was fascinating because I was one of probably a couple hundred people who were actually remote at Atlassian at that point. I joined a team that was intentionally made remote, but most of our team members were in office. They were in Sydney or Mountain View or San Francisco or Austin, and we were a office culture. It's just I was one of the few exceptions out there, and then we've kind of changed that. And so what we've had to do is we've had to become, knowing we had a culture back then of teamwork, of how do we collaborate radical new ways, we needed to figure out, how do we intentionally keep that culture, but at the same time evolve it. And so that's where like organizations like our Team Anywhere group has been started up. So we actually, when we announced that we're going to go distributed first, we said, you know what? It's one thing to actually say that, but the other thing is to actually back it up with support. And so we built a whole team around this that's focused on everything from, helping our team members figure out where they can work, but then also doing things like we have a whole coaching team that's focused on, hey, you're a distributed team. You know, you may not feel like you're connected as much as you used to be because you used to be all in the office, but now during the pandemic, maybe you started moving around. Like, here, let us help you. And so I think that's the word here is intentional. And that's the big thing that we've had to do is we couldn't just let the culture just be its thing. We said, well, if we want to maintain our teamwork culture, we need to focus on that. Like, let's go out there and like figure out working agreements on how do we want to collaborate in an async world. Let's figure out, how are we going to make decisions now that we're needing to make them across the globe in a way where I can't just ask you, Tim, what's your thoughts on it? So it's something that we've had to kind of evolve over time. And I think that's what many organizations have to do. They can't just say, hey, we did it the way we used to. Now we're going to do it differently. It's like, well, no, how are you going to do it differently? What are the tools, the techniques you're going to put in place to do it differently? But to me, one of the big things, and we've actually gotten really intentional, again, that is that word again, gotten really intentional about how we do this, is that when new people come in, although we can't send them, we're not sending them to offices anymore. When I joined, I went to an office for my first day to kind of meet people. What we're doing though is we're bringing them together in cohorts, and we're actually having collaboration, team building with all the new hires like we used to do, but in a remote setting. That's not all the way going to get you there, but it's going to be something that is saying, hey, welcome, you're new. We want you to feel like you're part of a new team. So we're going to do a lot of the same things we did. When I joined, we did everything from, get to know Atlassian and our history to, hey, we're going to do a foundation event where we're going to do some volunteering as a team to learn about that. We still do that today with our remote teams. Now, instead of 4 of us in a conference room, there might be 15, 20 of us on a Zoom call. But the idea is that we kind of come together to still have that experience. And so that's a really important part for at least the onboarding thing.
I love
definitely.
that.
Go for it.
Interrupt, but you clearly the repetition of the word intentional. It's clearly such a proactive mission for you.
Right. And you know what? One thing I want to add on here, because you brought it up and it just it got me all excited, because this idea that, to your point, we've got, we had this capital we gained with people from in-person collaboration that we started spending. We started spending and we kept spending. And all of a sudden now I've joined a team where I have no capital, because guess what? I'm on a brand new team. Maybe we've all on a brand new team. We've never met each other. And to me, there's a lot of it.
Your overdraft. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Now it's in the red.
Yeah.
But and one of the things that happens is, and I think this is another truism for me. I truly believe this is the case, is that for us, we can create good human connection through Zoom or through online mechanisms, just like you and I are.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can't make it all the way there in the program called human connection. We can load it about 99% of the way there. But that program will never finish loading without some sort of opportunity to connect in person. And I say this because of what I've experienced and what I've seen. Like, I legitimately saw this happen last week, even when I was in the San Francisco office. It was seeing a bunch of our designers come together for the first time, probably since the pandemic, and a lot of new people. And although they've probably been working together for months, if not years, just the energy and the experience that they had when they met in that cafeteria and they started like, oh my gosh, it's so cool to meet you in person. You can watch that program click up to 100%. We're like, there you go. You built the capital, and now you start using that. But you can't just do it once and call it good. You can't just be like, all right, you met, you're good. It's like, you got to find ways. And actually Atlassian invested in a program called, we call it intentional togetherness, because we say, we got to do that. Like whether it be, and it can't just be, hey, we're going to get everyone together every quarter. We're like, how do we invest in the communities you're in? So in Detroit, there's probably about 24 Atlassians that live around me. Let's get together. Atlassian's going to help us get together for a happy hour where we at least get to meet each other and have a connection. It's funny because so we use Slack at Atlassian. And so we actually have since I started, we had an Atlassian Slack Detroit area. And it's one of those things where that's where, again, there's about 30 of us, we talk on there, but it's funny because, to your point, we have commonality because of where we're at. So like right now in Michigan, it is apple cider and donut season for us. The apple trees are going, everyone's making apple cider. So what's lighting up in our Slack channel? Apple cider and donuts. And we can all connect to that because we're in the area. And so
what about the
those
Coney
are
dog?
little
You must have a
human
Coney
moments.
dog. You must have a
I know,
Coney
right?
dog.
Exactly. You're gonna have. I wouldn't mix apple cider and a Coney dog. I'm just gonna make that recommendation right now.
Again, I'll do my research. So I want to ask you something else there. We're talking, you've talked about we've got the tools to communicate.
Yeah.
We've got Zoom, we've got Slack, we've got all the rest of it. You've left that 1% that the program can only load in person ultimately. That final bit, to what extent are tools chipping away at that?
I still think that we can't undo like millions of years of evolution around that human connection, but we can get darn close to it. And the thing is there's some really cool, even organizations and companies that Atlassian has invested in because we care about that. There's a company called Welo. It's called Welo. The website is welo.space. And what they're WELO.space. And you're going to find. Yeah, you'll find it out there, and it's a really cool company that we've invested in because what it's focused on is saying, how do we take the space that we think about in a physical world and bring it into a digital world? And knowing that, we're going to still have Zoom meetings, but what they do is they help you build spaces where it looks like an office. Like we say, hey, here's a conference room, and I can see that Tim and John and Jill are all over there in that conference room having a Zoom meeting, and I can go over there and digitally knock on that door and say, hey, can I come in and join you all? And so I can actually see where people are at. Maybe someone's in a meeting, maybe someone's heads down somewhere, or that someone's just relaxing in the, they're at some heads down time, they're eating lunch, and so they're in the cafeteria. So if someone wants to pop in and say, hey, how you doing, Tim? How's your day doing? They can do that.
That's
and
brilliant. So the notion that I would want to see where people are and create an illusion that, hey, they're in that room, and then to tap on the window and to feel the physical tap, presumably, if they get it right. And I've got my haptic gloves.
If you got haptics and stuff, and that'll be the future there at that point. But and this is where modern work comes into my mind. Like for them, they're like, let's start with just the space. We built it they even said they built it for 3D in mind in the future. But right now, it's a 2D image that you can kind of find your space around. And to your point, we can now say, I know where people are. I know where I am in this space. And it's one more step that allows us to feel like we've got some connection. We feel like we have the group, our team, versus just an individual at my desk. Like I can see a little bit more.
It's fascinating. I want to ask you, I'm sure I will certainly look up Welo, and I think others will. That's fascinating.
I highly recommend it. It's a cool organization.
We'll watch their progress with interest. It's interesting, I mean, I think the magic happens ultimately if the employees are all aligned to a mission.
Yes.
Very clearly aligned to a simple mission, and then have total trust put in them. Now that's and it's interesting. I had the pleasure, it's coming out soon. I had the pleasure of sitting with an ex-Atlassian alumni, Ross Chaldecott.
Yeah.
Who has now started a business called Kind.
Mm-hmm.
So they're early stage, up to 29 employees. They've done a first round funding of 10.6 million and are on the journey. But it's really clear that one of their opportunities is that he's clearly brought sort of Atlassian working practices to the piece.
Yeah.
I'm saying that. And there's a sense of absolute clarity of why they're there, which is essentially, quote, to create more founders, because their product is essentially described as the Shopify for SaaS. So in essence, is putting in place all the infrastructure out of the box that all SaaS companies waste 6 months building at the outset, rather than focusing on their core product. But they've put in that focus on a shared goal and a real global mission, hand in hand with total trust. Hard to do. It's hard to really genuinely trust.
You know what the two things we find in our research that helps to improve team effectiveness? alignment to a goal,
Yep.
psychological safety. Right in there. Two biggest factors that we find that helps make teams high performing is, do you know what you're working towards, what that outcome is, or are you wandering in the dark? And then do you feel like you have the ability to, in a psychological safe world, like I could feel like I could take the time I needed off, because guess what? I'm not afraid of the system coming back at me. I feel like, you know what? I could bring up the things I need to, and that people trust me. They inherently trust me to do the right thing. In our new distributed world, people can vote with their feet. And so a lot of times that organizational, that kind of, I don't know, that bullheadedness of like, no, we're sticking to our guns on how we used to work. That'll be sitting on a burning platform for many organizations as people decide, is this where I want to spend my time? Is this what I want my personal legacy to be? Is doing that, or do I want to do something else? Because even something like me, who I live in Detroit, there's a lot of great companies, but Atlassian wasn't here. It wasn't a company I could have ever worked at before. But now I can. And anyone around the world could work for Atlassian, knowing that, wow, I could have that. Organizations are going to have to, and I've already started to figure out, how do we react to that?
I would love to. I mean, you're absolutely right, and I think it's that. There has to be sort of some leverage, doesn't there? And it's the attraction and retention of talent, which I'm bound to say this, but I also believe it. It's which is always number one in the success of an organization. I mean, it just
100%. If you look at a company and you look at a company's balance sheet today, where they spend their money, where most of that money goes to? Talent.
All about
those are their biggest assets, that they have. They just don't think of it like that.
All about the people. Tell you what I'd love to see, and I imagine you may have done it, but I would love to see the extremes of your distributed workforce. Mm-hmm. I mean, where are people? Have you got anybody in the North Pole, the Arctic? I would love to see the absolute.
You know what? I will send you. You know what I'll do? You can include this as maybe an addition into this. Is there? I do have a slide that shows you where our people are located at.
Wonderful.
And it really is. It's fascinating. We actually have a time lapse slide where it kind of shows you where we were in 2019 to 2022. And it's amazing where you see places start opening up, because for us, we do have to enable places for tax and legal purposes. Yes. But we've got a whole team that is out there doing that. So like parts of, like, a great example is India. You're going to look at the kind of, India, and beforehand we had this very small area, but because of the way India is broken up, you have to unlock different places to allow people to work. The whole country's lit up now. It's amazing to watch that. Same with areas like parts of New Zealand, as well as parts of Europe, where we just didn't have people there, so we didn't have anything from a tax. And now all of a sudden it's opening up. So I'll send you that slide, so that way you can include that as an addition here. So if people want to go see it, or I'll give you a link. They can see what that looks like.
Throw a link in, it'd be fantastic.
Yeah, we'll put a link in there for people listening, because then you can kind of see, like, wow, this is what's possible when, I'm going to say it again, you get intentional about your distributed workforce. Like, this is the organicness that comes out of that.
Now, a couple of things to close off on. I'm interested in if you are in the metaphorical ball pit and future gazing, what your view on that is. What I mean, the argument is, don't be a psychic because there's no future in it. But I'm still interested in.
Right, exactly. Let me get my cards out. Let's see here.
Still interested in your future gazing and your view of the future. And then really, I've called it advice on these notes here, but I mean, advice is a dangerous thing. Your call to action, or your lay a few breadcrumbs for organizations who are perhaps less advanced or less intentional at the moment on that journey to distributed working.
So I'd say first things first is my forecasting, my future vision, and honestly, to me, I see two things in terms of how we continue to evolve. And it's a lot of the patterns we see today just exponentially growing. One is what we kind of talked about, this idea of intentional togetherness. Yep. There is going to be, as distributed work continues to kind of solidify itself around the world, we still have to find a way to continually find that human connection. And so we're going to see much more of that kind of structure get created. You see it right now. There's companies being formed around how do we help an organization not just run a company meeting, but actually help them just get their people together. So I think that we're going to see almost a renaissance in that over the next couple of years, where there's going to be a lot of creative ideas. Organizations like Welo, places like the metaverse are going to start kind of coming up in ways of how do we get people to connect, not just call into a Zoom meeting. So I think that's one.
Yep.
And then the second kind of prediction I've got here is what we found is because of how we're distributed, the aspect of team is so much more important. So I think that what we're going to find is teams are going to start almost finding themselves in a spot where they are their own little, they're going to think of themselves as their own little companies. How do we work almost to that, that the idea of the kind organization, how do we start up a bunch of little founders out there that are working in concert with an organization? I really do feel that this idea of, we're going to build better team bonds because we have to focus on those people we directly work with versus just pure water cooler, we're in a large organization.
We're
going to start seeing this more intentional usage of teams kind of being long-lived, teams working together for a long, much more collaboratively as a team than even we saw in the past. So we were forced to in the past because, hey, we sat together, we were part of a team. Now we need each other. So I really do think that you're going to start seeing that kind of cohesion of team as an independent body really start flourishing out there, which is good. It's almost like it's not the gig economy, but it's this idea that in an organization, there are teams that help support the organization. It's almost a contract between the organization and the team.
Absolutely. I'm just scribbling a note for you there.
Oh, there you go.
I'll tell you now, actually, there's been a bit of good old-fashioned book sharing that has happened on these podcasts. It's really nice. The odd guest has handed over a book that matters to them or something I might be interested in. And I think I'm probably yet to return the favor, but I'm going to return the favor. I'm going to pay it forward to you.
Excellent.
Unless you've read the book, but it's a book about teams. But they've taken the most unlikely examples, or not the examples that spring to mind. And there's probably 10 examples in the book, but one of them is the Rolling Stones. And it analyzes the Rolling Stones as from the perspective that they are a team, which is, it's been the same team members essentially, apart from Bill Wyman, for 50 years. Through thick and thin, and they go into a bit of analysis about why they what are the phrase, storming, norming, forming, etc.
Why they're still a team, why they haven't just crumbled, right?
And there's some good analysis in them. Anyway, I'll get you a copy somehow.
I would love it. I think that's great. And I think, one of the things that like stories like that are going to show us is like, what are those core elements of like keeping good teams together,
Absolutely.
So I think that brings me to those call to actions I wanted to share with you too, because I think that's, so one of the things they're kind of playing into that aspect that I want to share with your audience is that as they're going out and they're thinking about all these cool things we've talked about, problem that they're going to face is they're going to be like, I can't see my organization doing that. Well, the thing is, it doesn't have to start with your organization. It can just start with you and your team. If you are on a team and you want to say, how do we get a little bit more intentional about how we work? How do we make things like maybe we are in a distributed team, but it doesn't feel right? How do we get intentional about it? Actually spend some time investing. Do things like create a working agreement with your team. Go out there and figure out who each others are. Run a user manual play. All these things from the Atlassian team playbook. I totally recommend you check that out. Be intentional, run them, see if you can build better connections with your team. So I totally call to action, go out there, check out the playbook. We're going to give Tim a link to it so that way you all can go out there and check it out.
I was about to ask you
going out there and experimenting in small chunks.
I mean, I think you've said it there. Then if there's a playbook that they can, because people don't have, you're absolutely right. People are in organizations where they have just resistance and just doubt. And you have to start somewhere, don't you? And if they've got there a bit of something of a playbook, something of a, with an entry-level recipe they can try.
Yep, exactly. Fantastic. And the thing is, just like they say on airplanes, don't put your own, don't put someone else's oxygen mask on first, put on your own. So if you're struggling with this as your team, go be an example, be the shining light for everybody. And you're like, I want to be like Tim's team. That's awesome.
Hey, look, it's been absolutely fantastic. You've been, there are some really consistent themes in there. I think about, I mean, the ones that I hear are, again, this notion of sort of intentional, actually proactive action, getting shit done. There's clearly a massive thread of, I get the sense you actually like people, Mark, which is good.
A little bit, just a little bit.
There's such a high care factor there and such a high respect for the individual that comes across, which is always refreshing, sometimes surprising, but it's wonderful. So that's there. And then there's an innate hope and a belief in you, which is contagious. So I think it's wonderful. It's
good.
And the final thing I'd add is you've then thrown in some good real world tools that people can jump on. So I think the playbook will be fascinating to people. Wheelo, I think just intrigues me because I think
right, check it out. It is neat. I learned about it this year, earlier this year, and I'm ecstatic about it.
I love it. So look at the there's a lot of challenges in the world currently, but I think I might come across sometimes as a cynical Brit, so that's hardwired in. However, I'm also an optimist, and I think you clearly are, and it's infectious. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Tim. And one thing I'll say to your listeners here is, if you don't, make sure you go look up what a coney dog is. You'll be happy you did that.
I'm gonna find the coney dog in Sydney. There must be somebody producing.
There's got to be it. There's got to be it somewhere.
There's got to be. Good stuff. Thank you so much. Pleasure, Mark.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. Thank you so much for having me.
It's good.
Thanks for joining. This podcast was brought to you by Ember, creating talent solutions in technology, transformation, data and analytics, and project services across Australia. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to leave a comment, subscribe and share. If you'd like to get in touch with the Ember team, simply send an email, visit the website, or connect on LinkedIn. Contact details can be found in the description. See you next time.